When determining the distance between the main light and the subject's face, we will have to take into consideration the space we're shooting in, the distance at which we tested our basic strobe power value, the light effects we're after, and the type of light modifiers we have available. I personally stick with the 4 to 5 feet distance as it works well for the light and shadow pattern that I like in my pictures and the lighting equipment and modifiers that I use. But there are a couple of fundamental elements that you need to take into account as well in order to make the right decisions in your particular circumstances. In our basics video, I mentioned that the contrast of light increases as we move the light source closer to the subject's face, and this affects not only the overall light and shadow pattern in your pictures, but also the quality of your lighting on the subject's skin. Much of the resulting look of the skin in the pictures of course has to do with the makeup applied, but you can also control the brilliance of the highlights on the skin by the distance between the light source and the subject's face. At all times, harder light will create crispier highlights on the skin or any reflective surface for that matter. And if we look at the anatomy of the human face, we'll find that the human head is composed of a skull which is covered by flesh and then skin on the outside. The flesh is soft and the bones of the skull are hard, and where there is more flesh covering the bones, it is the softest in those places, so the skin isn't stretched there. And in those areas of the face or the body where the flesh is covering the skull or the bones in a thinner layer, the skin is tightly stretched on the flesh, and that's where it reflects the light the most. It sure depends on the facial structure and fat distribution for each individual, but typically there is less flesh under the skin, so it is stretched more and highlighted with the frontal lighting on the forehead, on the upper cheeks, on the bridge and the tip of the nose, and the central part of the chin. That's where the most prominent highlights from the frontal lighting are usually located, and of course the collarbones when we're talking about a head and shoulders framing. So now we have two elements to take into account: the natural reflective qualities of the skin and the contrast of the light, which depends on its quality and the distance between the light source and the face. And now here's your first assignment. Next time you're in the studio with a friend or a model, perform this quick test. It will really help you to see this for yourself, and you will never fail to adjust your lighting so that you capture a beautiful lighting pattern with attractive highlights and well-balanced midtones. Use a Barra beauty dish or a simple zoom reflector if you don't have one. Set it at 4 to 5 feet away from the face. Find the power output value that will give you a correct exposure. Notice your distance and take a test shot. Now, as you move this light source closer to the subject while compensating the strobe power for the correct exposure, the highlights on the forehead and the rest of the face will start spreading and taking up larger areas where the midtones were used to be, while also minimizing the transition between the highlights and the shadows. Notice your distance and take another test shot. Return to the initial position at 4 to 5 feet and start moving away from the subject, compensating the power value for the correct exposure again. Now double and triple the distance from the subject and take test shots. You will notice that the highlights slowly weaken as you move the light away until they disappear, and we're left with a flat and uninteresting light on the face, too much midtones and no highlights. Compare these test shots and find the ones where the light and shadow pattern looks the most attractive to you. That is your sweet spot. The incorrect choice of the distance between the main light and the face is one of the most common mistakes that I notice in beginner work, and it comes from the lack of fundamental knowledge of light behavior. So remember this and do not allow this mistake to creep into your lighting setups. Adjust the distance between your main light and the model's face depending on your circumstances, which include your light modifier, the facial features and natural quality of the model's skin as well as her makeup, until you get a beautiful light and shadow pattern in which the highlights and shadows are both well defined and not taking up the areas where midtones should be.